Welcome, everyone, for yet another Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where we are continuing our fourth movement on the 20th century and statecraft. For those who might have missed some of the last presentations, last week we had a beautiful presentation, which is now available on our website by Cynthia Chung, going through the combat during the heat of the Cold War to revive the principles contained within the UN Charter and outlined by Franklin Delano Roosevelt for a society of win-win cooperation founded upon the respect of sovereign nation states, which was never permitted to blossom. And Bandung was a place in 1954-55 where we had the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence organized by Zhou Enlai, many members of the Global South, the Pan-African and Pan-Arab movement. So that presentation is available in the description box of this video. Before that, we had Nicholas Jones, who's just joining us now, actually, who presented the first of his 2-part class series on Cheikh Anta Diop, the great statesman scientist of Africa, who had, and really leading spirit of the Pan-African movement, who had a real commitment to create a global renaissance and revive the Renaissance principles of Africa that had been destroyed by many, many years of imperial policies on that continent. Today, we have the pleasure of listening to my old friend, my colleague, Pascal Chevrier, who has just returned to us here in Montreal. Well, he's not in Montreal, just outside, from a 3-year sojourn in the Arctic, where he had been teaching students in one of the most northern Quebec Arctic reservations out there. And Pascal has been a passionate student of history who has done remarkable work over the years that I've known him. And today he will enlighten us to some of the elements that people need to understand about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is probably going to be a 2-part presentation, I believe, and I'm looking forward to hearing it. So Pascal, it is all yours.
Yeah, here it is. So FDR and JFK, 2 acts towards the American Republican grand design. And you probably recognize that quote, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So which document is it from? Anybody? Oh, are you all muted?
Most people are on mute.
Okay, so it's the Declaration of Independence of the United States. All right, I'm gonna rhetorically ask question and answer them at the same time. All right, so this is very important. This is a principle that is at the foundation of the U.S. Republic, and this is something that played a big role in what we're going to be looking at today. So keep that in mind. The Declaration of Independence and these principle that all men are created equal. Yes. How people might know about this history? Well, I don't know for you, but for me, back in the early 2000s, I was a young activist and I wanted to change the world. I was looking at what was the corruption and the problems in our society, in the Western world, obviously. And I came upon the Corporation documentary, not a very good documentary, but that's what I stumbled upon at the time. And I was doing some research, trying to figure it out. And, you might have heard of FDR by movies, documentaries, books, or even in your history classes. I also had, when I was in CEGEP, just after high school in Quebec, I took a elective class on U.S. history from Constitution, from the American Independence War until I think was just a bit after World War II. So anyway, so that's how I heard about FDR and different other things. And well, it's, I just wanted to put that out there because there's sometimes stuff that we hear. This is the popular realm. This is in the media and all that. What we're going to be discussing right now is not very much in the media because it's more in the books. It's more of what has been written, put on shelves and forgotten. And it doesn't necessarily mean that historians who are usually looking at the books and trying to dig them out will necessarily tell people about what they find. Most of the time they don't. And they stick to a very narrow narrative. So anyway, we'll see. I'll go back to this, but later on in my presentation, you'll see why. So idle hands are the devil's playground. So that's really, I think that what typified the era in which FDR came to power or had to become a leader, because basically the United States for, since the assassination, the death of McKinley, didn't really have a good leadership for inner leadership for the United States at home and for the, on the international stage. So let's get into this. A few little facts that probably you know or don't, but are, that's generally admitted. Date of birth, date of death, and what he did. So 1882 to 1945, that's a very interesting period because that's, right after, the American Civil War and Reconstruction. So he's born around that time. And he dies really just before the Second World War ends. So he saw a lot of things during his lifetime. We're going to get into this. So where do good presidents come from? Do anybody have idea? Is it like we just saw? Is it in the, or what we're about to see in the biographical elements, what people do or where they come from, what they eat for breakfast? Is that something that makes you a good leader? I don't know. These days I eat cereal with fruits. I think it's good and healthy. But I don't know if I'm going to become president one day. So anyway, that might be for nothing. So what is the material of a great leader? Let's just go through what he did in terms of FDR, the public figure. So between 1911 and 1913, that's just right before World War I, he's member of the New York State Senate. He also becomes the Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1913 to 1920. I didn't put it in there, but he tried, he ran for the 1920 president. He was to be the vice president of the candidate at the time for the Democratic Party. They lost. And right after, he contracted a paralytic illness, believed at the time to be polio. I think it is polio. I'm not an expert, but I think that's what it is in 1921. So he had to stop everything, consider his mortality, and figure out a way that he could improve himself and his country. He then decided to to run for governorship of the state of New York and won in 1928. And it didn't take much time that he became the 32nd president of the United States in 1933 to till 45. reelected 3 times. Only first and last president of the United States to be in this position. Let's go on. Okay, that's just the crest from or the coat of arms of the Roosevelt. So let's dig into his family. Maybe that's where it comes from. Maybe he's a good leader because his family was great. So just need to move these. Okay. So where does he come from? Well, in terms of the Roosevelt, you have Isaac Roosevelt. He was the great-great-grandfather of Franklin Roosevelt, and he was known in the family as the Patriot because he had taken part in the Committee of the 100 at the time of the American Revolution in New York State, and he was one of the original incorporator of the first public hospital in New York in 1770. He was also co-founder with Alexander Hamilton of the Bank of New York in 1784, and he became eventually the second president after Hamilton went on in 86 until 91, and he was in the sugar business. So does that make you a great leader? I don't know, but that's certainly an interesting resume that the family knew about because they had his portrait in the, I believe was in one of the living room, if I remember. I went to the Hyde Park estate a couple of years back, and I remember seeing that. I don't remember in which room, but they had it at the time also, and it was recognized by the family that Isaac Roosevelt had been part of the creation of the United States. So there was something to be proud of. On the sugar business, that's not so great because who work in the plantations down south in the Caribbeans, mainly slaves. So that's not so great, but it's something that also was acknowledged by FDR when he wrote a paper on his family, on his genealogy, where he came from. So that's something that was new from him too. Let's go on. Let's see who else. Wait a second. Yes, James Roosevelt the First. Okay, that's his father. So he was a businessman in the coal and transportation, and he also was a politician in New York State and horse breeder. Okay, interestingly, also he was a Union Democrat, so he didn't go for this secession during the Civil War. He was vice president of the Delaware and Hudson Railway, and he became also the president. He was put in charge of the Southern Railway Security Company, which purpose was to link north, south, and west rails in Lincoln's spirit of national reconstruction. He was put there by the Philadelphia junto, if you want, that was a continuation of the Ben Franklin circles. So he was put there to basically continue by the people of Philadelphia, by the Patriot faction of Philadelphia, were fighting to get a real reconstruction, because a lot of what happened after Lincoln's death was a lot of compromises, and you had probably about the carpetbaggers and the scalawags, maybe. Anyway, we won't get into this history right now, but this is just to let you know. This was a period where a lot of compromises were made, and the South was never reconstructed as it should have been. If Lincoln and his ideals had lived on during that period, and Ulysses Grant tried, but he was very he was blocked by many things. And I think I remember reading in his memoirs and Grant's memoirs that he thought the South should have been under military control for 30 years at least, to really be able to get rid of the Confederate element. And it wasn't done. So to Grant, that was the mistake. They had incorporated back the South too fast, and they had let basically the treasonous elements of the South and the North take over again. So that's FDR's father. That's what he was doing at the time. And if we go even earlier than that, the first Roosevelt who came to America was Cleese Martins Van Roosevelt, something like that. Roosevelt has been written in probably 9 different ways, so it's not exactly clear, but it got standardized over time to what we know right now. He was born in 1623, and we think there's speculation that he would have come to New Amsterdam around 1648, 9, or 50, around that time. Yeah, Roosevelt knew about that, and he wrote a paper about his family. So entitled, you see the picture, The Roosevelt Family in New Amsterdam Before the Revolution. In 1901, he wrote. It's not such a great paper, but it's interesting to see what he had in mind and how he saw his family and what they were, for good and for bad. And so he discusses a democratic spirit. So he says, they, the Roosevelts, have never felt rather that being born in a good position, there was no excuse for them if they did not do their duty by the community. And it is because this idea was instilled into them from their birth that they have in nearly every case proved good citizens. So that was important for Roosevelt. Whether that was what he knew from the family stories or what he had been able to dig up into his research on the genealogy, he knew that he was coming from a family that had goods and bads, but was trying to do good overall. And so this question of the general welfare, which is in the preamble of the US Constitution, that was something that also resonated a lot with Roosevelt. Even though I would say, from my research on him, that it was not something that was as developed in him before he contracted polio. I think his illness really made him rethink everything and dig up much more into his own self, his family background, and the history of the United States, the founding history of the United States. So you also have people who mix up the Roosevelts. So which Roosevelt are we talking about? Maybe you know about the two. Who are these two? So you have, oh, whoops, sorry. I'm going too fast. I'm trying to see it, everybody, at the same time. Okay. So you have Theodore Roosevelt and you have FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I forgot, but I didn't mention, but the Delano Roosevelt branch of the family was not very good either. They were in the opium trade. That was not very good.
Well, we could see that from the family crest you showed at the beginning with the opium poppy.
Oh, was it there? Okay. Okay, you noticed that. Okay, good. So, well, yeah, I just wanted to mention it. It's for today, it's going to be a footnote, but well, maybe we can go back to into this later on. So you have one who's a Democrat and one who's a Republican. Do you know which one is which? Because after that, everything is the same. They both became Assistant Secretary of the Navy. They both became governor of the state of New York, and they liked trees somewhat. Yeah. So
on the right is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. On the left is Teddy Roosevelt, and on the right is the Democrat.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Right, Magdalena, this is right. So FDR was a Democrat, and the Republican was Theodore. They were cousins. I think five degrees apart, cousins. And yeah, as also another anecdote, when FDR married Eleanor Roosevelt, who was also his 6th-degree cousin. It was Theodore who escorted Eleanor during the marriage to present Eleanor to FDR. Anyway, but that's okay. That's family stuff. So why they like trees? For different reasons. They had very different ideas, the two Roosevelts. So FDR liked trees because it was not just practical, but it made life better. If you planted a lot, he had the plan in the Hyde Park. I think he planted 500,000 trees over I think around 60 years that he was there, and there was something to be used from that in the conditions that the United States was in around the Great Depression. As you can see, the picture of the Dust Bowl, where cities and towns were completely submerged by sandstorms. That was crazy. So you have a point. If you like trees, that's good. I give it to you. But Theodore Roosevelt's idea of his tree loving was to basically create national parks and not touch anything in that. So really conserve nature from mankind, separate them as much as possible. That was the idea of Theodore Roosevelt. But I'm not going to get so much into Theodore Roosevelt in this presentation. Maybe we'll mention him again later on. But that's that was just to make the point that both were very different, and people should not try to box them in the same. They were not the same. Not just because Democrat, Republican. That's just. Nah, that's not how you have to look at history. So why was FDR a Democrat? Why would he talk so highly of Thomas Jefferson? Because maybe from listening to the series of classes. I don't know how many of you have listened to all of the classes, looked at what the American system of political economy is. If it's a recent discovery for you, or you've known about it for a long time. I know some of you have, but it's not always very clear to understand what's going on between Jefferson and Hamilton. Jefferson is seen as, the one of the founder because he wrote the Declaration of Independence, which Ben Franklin and others corrected about 110 times. So he did write, in the first essay, but that was changed a lot after that. And he didn't really fight during the Revolutionary War. He stayed on his estate with his slaves. And maybe if you read Anton Chaikin's last book, Who We Are, you know that he was co-opted onto the British, on the British side. So Jefferson was not that great, actually. From the standard, from what we know today, from what can be dig up on him. So why was FDR so fond of Jefferson? Okay, we're going to discuss that because FDR was a Democrat, and the Democratic Party affiliation goes back to Jefferson against the Federalist, Whigs, and Republicans who come from Hamilton. So let's look at this. Can somebody read this quote?
I can read.
Not muted. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
About 70 years ago, two great political parties were first formed in this country. That Thomas Jefferson was the head of one of them, and Boston the head of the other.
Yeah. Okay. So who do you think said that?
Roosevelt?
Nope. About 70 years ago, if you think about it, 70 years after the creation of the political parties of the United States.
Was that Lincoln?
Ah, okay. There we go. So Lincoln wrote that in 1859. He was asked to go to Boston to deliver a speech honoring Jefferson. And he didn't have time, so he declined and sent a letter that could be read, and that was in the letter. So he mentions Thomas Jefferson, but he doesn't mention Hamilton. That's very strange, because at the time, a lot of people knew, and that's how it's been framed, that the fight was between Jefferson and Hamilton. So, okay, Hamilton is not mentioned. So what happened? Well, that's something interesting, because that's also, the original work on that. I'm greatly indebted to Tony Chaikin, because he did a lot of work, and people should go and search for what he did, because that's where I take all of this. That's my inspiration. So this idea of Boston is really this question of the Anglophile, of the oligarchical faction. So Lincoln recognized that there was a problem. He wasn't attacking Hamilton, or he wasn't putting him in there because he wanted to stress something else. Hamilton was, as you may know, was shot in a duel by Aaron Burr, really the founder of Wall Street, of today's Wall Street. And from that point on, really, I mean, that was the treasonous faction which took over the Federalist Party, and killed Hamilton and destroyed his plans for the United States. So after that, who remained? Thomas Jefferson. So that's in part what you have to understand if you want to if you want to grasp the irony of that quote from Lincoln, which nobody is going to tell you about today. What did FDR say about Lincoln? Well, he said, "I think it is time to claim Lincoln as one of our own. The Republican Party has certainly repudiated, first and last, everything that he stood for. That period from 1865 to 1876 should be known as America's Dark Ages. I'm not sure that we are not headed for the same type of era again." So that was in 1929. Whoa, interesting. So that was a letter that he sent to historian Claude Bowers. Ironically, Bowers was not such a great guy. He had just written a book about the Civil War and was really on the side of the Confederacy. He was really propping up the lost cause. So it's interesting and funny to see what FDR had to say, because he wanted to take back Lincoln's legacy, and that's in 1929. So that's just before the crisis, the stock market crisis hits, and that's when he was governor of New York. Let's go on. So I told you before when we read in the first slide the excerpt from the Declaration of Independence, that these principles, the founding principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, are really what you have to keep in mind when you look at FDR and what he did, because really that's something that shaped him. I believe very much. And that's something that every good president of the United States always went back to, because these principles are really eternal. So we see here, that's debating that in the preamble of the Constitution, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." So I think that's what, when FDR is a Democrat, FDR is let's say, Jeffersonian, or praises Jefferson, well, it's in the ideas, the principle of the founding documents. That's the important thing. So basically, even if Jefferson had done bad stuff that we won't get into right now, he was still worthy of praise if these principles were actually tied with him, if these principles were tied with the Democratic Party. And that's also, why he wanted to bring in the Lincoln legacy in the Democratic Party, or in, overall in the United States affairs at the time, and his policies. That was the idea, to embed these principles in his actions, so that people would not necessarily go by, asking, "Are you a Jeffersonian, Hamiltonian, this, that, what's your political etiquette?" But really, what are the principles by which you go by? And that's a very important thing. So let's go. So FDR became sick in 1921, so he had to stop his political career at the time. And I think, as I said before, that his illness really made him a better man, because he had to reflect on all of these things, all of these principles that we've been discussing so far from the American Republican history. And his political affiliation, where he came from. Because before FDR, the Democratic Party was not great. It was not what people got, or have in mind today. Really, the Democrat, which was the
Democratic Party today is not so great either.
well, yeah. Let's say when I was a kid, people still thought the Democratic Party was good, and that's why everybody was against the war and the Bush at the time of the Bush era. There was still an idea that the Democratic Party could be better, and you're right. Today, I don't think that's where we should have put our eggs in that basket. But let's say before FDR, the Democratic Party was really not great. It was the Southern Party. It was, really, I mean, the Confederacy. When you look at Woodrow Wilson, all these guys who were propping up the Ku Klux Klan, even from the White House, that was the Democratic Party for you. So FDR was in there, but eventually, and I think what I said with the polio, that made him reflect in an even deeper manner on where he came from and what was his purpose if he were to live, because polio could have killed him, and many people were dying from that at the time. So it was precarious for some time. But he was able to recover to a certain extent, and he was still crippled. He couldn't really walk alone, but or for a long period of time. But so he decided to go back into politics, and his way to do it was to run for the governorship of New York. And at the time, he wrote a paper for the Foreign Affairs magazine, which is published by the CFR, if people know about it. It's not exactly like, it's a very influential magazine, but it's not necessarily a great magazine. It's much more on the side of the oligarchy. So, but he published a paper in there, 14 pages, entitled "Our Foreign Policy: A Democratic View." And I would need some people to read, or one to read the excerpts that I highlighted.
A single-handed intervention by us in the internal affairs of other nations must end. With the cooperation of others, we shall have more order in this hemisphere and less dislike.
Yes, go on. Or somebody else.
The time is ripe to start another chapter. On that new page, there is much that should be written in the spirit of our forebears. If the leadership is right, or more truly, if the spirit behind it is great, the United States can regain the world's trust and friendship and become again of service. We can point the way once more to the reducing of armaments. We can cooperate officially and wholeheartedly with every agency that studies and works to relieve the common ills of mankind. And we can for all time renounce the practice of arbitrary intervention in the home affairs of our neighbors. It is a spirit, sir, which matters.
Yeah, that's how he ends the paper. And I also included another quote, which is just about in the middle. So there's another one here, if you can read it.
An analysis of our own history disproves the accusation that this selfish spirit is the real American spirit. In the debates during the War of the Revolution and in the long discussions immediately preceding the adoption of the Constitution, it was plain that careful thought was being given to every conceivable form of government in the hope that what the United States finally adopted might serve as a pattern for other people, especially in regard to the spirit that should govern the relations of one state with another. The words of the Declaration of Independence itself invoke a decent respect to the opinions of mankind.
Wow. So that's very interesting that, in 1928, he publishes that in the Foreign Affairs, which is the organ of the CFR. And he says basically what we've been doing in terms of intervention around the world is wrong. And, especially in the Americas, if you look at what Theodore Roosevelt was known for, the big stick policy, that was a shame. So that's another way that FDR takes, distance himself a lot from his predecessor, Roosevelt. And to me, when I read these, I don't know about you. I don't know if you've seen the presentation that was given on the Westphalian Treaty of Westphalia, but that, to me, that's FDR discussing the Westphalian principle of the sovereignty of nations, and also not just that, but that the United States purpose since the Constitution, since the debate and the adoption of the Constitution, is basically to do that, to continue and preserve this Westphalian principle, promote it around the world, and make sure that it's not going to be enforced by the weapons. It's not going to be something that is just, we do it because we're strong, and we do it because you're weak. That was not the intention of Roosevelt, and that's something which is very clear, and very interesting that he would publish it at that time in that magazine. But that's something in 1928. I think that really he had time to think about it, and really emerge himself into the American Republican history, and look at the world from that standpoint. And with the as you remember the quote on Lincoln, to think about, well, what can we do for our people, and what can we do for the whole world? What is our purpose? What's the purpose of our nation in the world? What's this real American spirit, if it's not to intervene and just enforce our rules, or not really our rules at the time, because it was mostly these wars were done for corporate interests. So what's the purpose? And that's very interesting to look at FDR thinking and writing about this, because you get to know him better. You get to know the character of the man. So 1932 comes quickly, and that's his first presidential victory. So Roosevelt is also known for having said, "I ask you to judge me by the enemies I have made." And that's something also very interesting that people should think about when they study history, when they look at what's been going on. Because especially today, you have a lot of stuff that's being written. Like I heard also, or I read something recently about people saying that what FDR did actually prolonged the Great Depression, and that he was just wrong. He made it worse. And I mean, okay, I hear, but it doesn't mean that you're it's like the what we hear today. It's not because you're upset that you're right. It's not because he didn't do what you wanted to be done that, he's wrong. So that's very interesting. Who were Roosevelt enemies? We're going to look into this right now. And we're going to look at the beginning of his presidency. So I'm going to read this one. It was a long process to be elected as the Democratic Party choice for the presidential ticket in 1932. There was a convention in Chicago, and it took I don't remember exactly how many, but it was many turns of votes before Roosevelt was chosen in the end. And it was kind of a nasty. There's a very interesting documentary that you should watch for this, called 1932, which Matthew was the art designer for. That's going to be my sources at the end. But I'm not going to go too much into this right now in the convention, but just to see what FDR said, what was his idea when he accepted the position to be the Democratic Party nominee for the presidential ticket. So he said, there are two ways of viewing the government's duty in matters affecting economic and social life. The first sees to it that a favored few are helped and hopes that some of their prosperity will sift through to labor, to the farmer, to the small businessman. That theory belongs to the party of Toryism, and I had hoped that most of the Tories left this country in 1776. Our Republican leaders tell us economic laws, sacred, inviolable, unchangeable, cause panics, which no one could prevent. But while they prate of economic laws, men and women are starving. We must lay hold of the fact that economic laws are not made by nature. They are made by human beings. And he continued saying, oh, that's a bit high. Okay. Let's see how I can, oops. Okay. I can't see the first line. Can somebody read the first? Well, can somebody read this?
One word more. Out of every crisis, every tribulation, every disaster, mankind. Go on.
Thank you. Rises with some share of greater knowledge, of higher decency, of purer purpose. Today we shall have come through a period of loose thinking, descending morals, an era of selfishness among individual men and women and among nations. Blame not governments alone for this. Blame ourselves in equal share. Let us be frank in acknowledgement of the truth that many amongst us have made obeisance to Mammon, that the profits of speculation, the easy road without toil, have lured us from the old barricades. To return to higher standards, we must abandon the false prophets and seek new leaders of our own choosing. I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. Let us all here assembled constitute ourselves prophets of a new order of competence and of courage. This is more than a political campaign. It is a call to arms. Give me your help, not to win votes alone, but to win in this crusade to restore America to its own people. So this is very interesting. And when 1932 election comes by, he wins by a landslide. I think Hoover only won 6 states in terms of the Electoral College. So it was a landslide for FDR in 1932. And I think that the spirit that he was, what he was representing in the Democratic Party, but for all Americans, that's what, they've been waiting for. All of this policy of laissez-faire and just, go by the market, it's going to tweak itself. It's going to readjust. It's going to work out. Everything's going to be fine. Don't worry. Just let it go. Well, clearly it wasn't working. So FDR knew what to do. He had looked at the American history to figure it out. And he had a plan. So people really, got behind him. So that's a very interesting speech that he gives at the convention. And he gets elected, but before he there was a transition time. So he was to assume office in March, on March 4th was the inauguration. But before that, during the transition period, he would go around the nation to organize people. And he was in Miami on February 15th. Maybe you heard about this. There was an attempt, assassination on FDR. So I just put this. There's actually footage that you can see. You can see the footage that was done at the time. It's online. So you have this Miami Herald first page there, and you have the picture of the anarchists, the Italian anarchists who tried to kill Roosevelt at the time. And there was a lady in the crowd who was able to basically bump Zangara's arm as he took his shot. And Roosevelt was safe. He had nothing, but 5 other people were injured. And eventually the Chicago mayor, Anton Chermak, died from his wounds. So there was something going on after that it was hit by the Chicago mafia, because Anton Chermak was trying to get the mafia, under control. But that was not the case. It was not the idea. The people were pretty clear, and the lady who actually bumped Zangara's pushed him when he was aiming to take the shot, said that he was aiming at the president. It was not about Anton Chermak. And if she had not moved his arm, probably would have shot FDR. So that was just right, just 3 weeks before FDR was to be inaugurated. So there was already some opposition. Clearly, some opposition was there against FDR. I wonder why. What's going on?
Yeah, their streamlining of this guy into the electric chair without doing any serious investigation as to what he was a part of is also very circumspect. I think it was like 4 weeks till he was executed, and no real investigation.
Yeah, around really when Chermak, because Chermak died maybe around 2 weeks after he was wounded. Not necessarily from it seemed like there was a lot of hospitals were not like they are today, I guess, or I don't know if I should say that, but there was a lot of malpractice at the time, and it seems like he could have survived, but the job was not well done. So he died, and right after they said, okay, well, you killed him. Maybe you were not trying to kill him. You killed him, so you're sentenced to the electric chair right now. Bye. And like the next day, something like that. You're right. So it's a bit strange. And so FDR is not dead. Good. So he's going to be inaugurated. But following that, well, not following that, but if you think about the situation he was in when he got into office, we're going to be going back and forth a little bit just to put into perspective, what was the situation. And now, so let's look at, the crisis, what happened with the Great Depression, without necessarily going too much into details, but, it was a catastrophe. The unemployment rate was very high, as you can see the graph. We're going to some numbers soon. Maybe you all, that's a famous picture that I put on the left. Jobless man, keep going. We can't take care of our own. Yeah, well, that's great. So people were during the Depression, were roaming from one city to another to try to find work, and there was none, because one out of four was out of job. So it was very a very crazy time. So that's what FDR comes in. So some numbers, not everything, but just to give you an idea, 13 million unemployed in March 1932. So that's just 1 year before he takes office. Bank failures between 1929 and 1933 are about 9,000. That's quite a lot. By 1933, depositors had seen $140 billion disappear through these bank failures. Industrial bankruptcies were from 1929 to 32, 119,371. And the unemployment rate, the curves that we saw in the former slide, in 1932, the unemployment rate was at 24%. So, pretty much around one out of four out of job. And you had falling food prices. So the cultivators, farmers were also going bankrupt quick, and were also destroying their crops because they wanted the prices to go back up. And if you follow the idea of, offer and demand, well, usually when there's less, prices should go up, but that's not exactly how it worked, because, that's not how it works. That's a good way to put it. That's not how it works. So everybody was losing. And therefore, when FDR took office in March, he declared a banking holiday for 4 days, which was extended for some places, some banks. But really, in 4 days, he organized to send federal agents around the country and audit the banks and make sure that they were solvable, that they could reopen. And if they couldn't, well, put them in receivership and figure out how to, save people from, save people's savings, basically, and get the banks reopening. So he created different agencies to do that. The FDIC, the SEC, lots of stuff, lots of acronyms were created at the time, and we're going to look into this a little bit. But I want to address this question of the gold standard. I don't know if people have heard about this, because that's one of the big opposition that's usually coming from the right and libertarians against FDR. I don't know if people know about the gold standard, what it is, what it does, why, what happened, maybe. Yeah, no.
That is extraordinarily important to clarify for people. Yeah, most people hate FDR, or those who really hate FDR, 80% of them really hate him because of the gold issue. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So the gold standard, that was really the idea of that, you had the Federal Reserve already existed. That was back in the, I believe, the Woodrow Wilson time. They was created on some Christmas Eve secret meeting. And so you had the Federal Reserve controlling basically the currency. And the gold standard meant that basically you had to back your currency with your gold reserve, with what you had in gold. And what happened when FDR came into office is that basically people who had gold decided to sell it. And it's not everybody who had gold. A lot of those who were selling that were big bankers on Wall Street. And so they were letting the gold basically flow out of the United States. So imagine you're trying to put people back to work. You're saying you can do it with government programs, or that, intervention from the government will help to do that. But if the government doesn't have any gold, if there's no gold in the country, how can you create any currency, anything to kickstart the economy, kickstart your program, and employ people by the same? So this was an attack on the United States coming from these banking circles, financial circles on Wall Street and in London to get the gold out of the United States. So what FDR did when he came in was to stop any transactions on gold. You couldn't sell gold from the United States outside. You can do it. It was taken, by the government in a sense, to make it short. But that was the idea, and that was the effect. If FDR had not done that, then at the time the system, the way it functioned, would not have made it possible for him, even though he was the president, to do anything about the situation. And so that's also why he had to use to reorganize the Reconstruction Financial Corporation, if I remember right, which was created before in Hoover's time, Hoover's presidency, but was not used the same way that FDR would, to funnel the credit to create what was necessary to put different projects like the TVA into effect. So that's something, it's a big attack on FDR. A lot of people are really upset, but really this gold standard is coming out of the old British Venetian system. It's not useful. It's not anything interesting if you want to create wealth. It's just something for people who already have wealth. As that's really what it is. It doesn't help anything about national sovereignty and great projects. So that's why FDR had to do it. In a nutshell, that's what I'm going to say on that right now. We can add after that if you want. And you have a caricature, or I think it was political pamphlets, which was circulated at the time to get rid of Davis and Coolidge. Basically, people, we're not going to talk about Davis and Coolidge, but I wanted just for you to look at what's going on in this caricature, and who's manning the puppets. Can you see on the hands, on the cuff? You have a name, so it's Morgan. That's J.P. Morgan. So people knew at the time what was going on, and right away, I'm just going to jump into this. there was an investigation on what had been going on in 1929. Why was there a crash on Wall Street? What happened? Why was it, that you had the roaring 20s, everything was great, people were buying, crazy, Wall Street, everything, the stocks were going up. It was all fine, and then everything crashed. Why? That was a question. And so there was a banking investigation launched before Roosevelt came into office, but it wasn't really going anywhere before you had this guy Pecora, Ferdinand Pecora, and his name really means sheep in Italian, but he was no sheep, and he fought, as the Sicilian he was, he fought Wall Street and was able to expose them, and that's something that in the public opinion, what people on the ground, the common man, would see was that basically you had all of these guys, the Morgan, the Lamont, all of these, the mayors, Kuhn Loeb, and others on Wall Street. All of these guys were not paying anything. They were not paying taxes. They had no income taxes between 1929 and 1933. They were not paying anything, and Pecora was able to expose them and subpoena them in front of the Senate's subcommittee on banking and finance, I believe the name was. So basically, J.P. Morgan and others had to come and explain themselves in front of the U.S. Senate, and right after that was in the newspaper. That previously, the Morgan, they were also they owned a lot of industries, but also a lot of newspapers. And now Pecora was basically exposing what they had been doing. And also, you have to know that there was a lot of insider trading going on. And I don't know if we can call it like that, but when the crash happened, well, just before the crash happened, the preferential list of clients from Morgan, from the Morgan circles, was called up and told to get out of the market. And so they exited at the same time. And that created, the run on the banks. That created the fall of the markets. And who was left to absorb this fall? Well, it was just a common guy who had put some money in and thought he was making a great business by just waiting for the stocks to go up. Well, Morgan's preferential list left and everything collapsed. And that was proven and exposed by the Pecora Commission. So that gave a lot more ammunitions for Roosevelt to launch his New Deal and attack the treasonous elements in the United States that were trying to not only make him fail, but really destroy the nation. And you have the picture of, so J.P. Morgan on the bottom left and Ferdinand Pecora on the right. Something else happened. So the New Deal was going on. And in 1934, you had this general, Smedley Butler, who was approached by a former, I believe, U.S. Reserve men who tried to get him into a plot to overthrow the government. That's something that, at the time was poo-pooed and said, yeah, that's just fiction, that's not happening, it's not true when it first came out. But investigations led to prove that basically what was going on in Europe, of people, wealthy people in the United States, thought it was a good idea to do in the US. And so they were modeling themselves. Oh, I forgot the name after McGuire. Anyway, okay, I'll find that back. So this General Smedley Butler was approached by McGuire and another guy who were in the U.S. Reserve and connected with some good or great people who wanted to save the United States from Roosevelt and the communists, and basically applied the fascist program in the United States. And so eventually Smedley Butler went on television and exposed them on live television, and that was also something that was proven. I told you I would go back to this, but that's what was shown in this the corporation documentary that I saw when I was young. And so that was very interesting to me. I didn't know anything about this. And I'm not sure that anybody, but most people today know about this this part of the history during the Great Depression. But this was a very close danger. It was something that nearly happened if Butler had gone into this plan. But Butler was a smart guy, and he was tired of fighting wars because he had been in Haiti, he had been in, I think, in Honduras, a bit everywhere during the big stick policy of Theodore Roosevelt. He had been fighting for American and British interests in South America, and he was really tired of all of this. And he faked of going into this plan just to gain enough evidence that it was true to be able to expose them. And that was something that was done also in front of the, he was subpoenaed by the US Senate. I think, the committee that became the Un-American Affairs or Un-American Committee.
The Committee on Un-American Activities.
That's it. Thank you. So he was subpoenaed in front of them, and that's how it broke loose, and it was aborted. Basically, okay, we can't do it now because everybody knows. And who was behind that? Who do you think? Well, there were supposed to be, 500,000 soldiers, ex-soldiers that were supposed to march on Washington, D.C. So exactly, like what the March on Rome under Mussolini was supposed to replicate that, but in the United States. One of the demands, because Smedley Butler was told, hey, you should lead this and you should read this speech that we've written for you. And what was in the speech? Well, people were asking for the gold standard to come back. That was one of the main demands. So do you think that, 500,000 ex-soldiers who are just waiting for paychecks or want to buy gold or want to sell their gold? Is that really what their first demand? Like, we want to sell our gold. This is it. We're going to take over, create a dictatorship, a fascist dictatorship in Washington because we really want our gold back. You decide. So, Butler was kind of smart, and he figured it out, and he said, well, that doesn't make any sense. I know the guys, and, they don't talk about gold standard anytime. So, okay, that's just foolish. Who's behind that? And he asked these guys, McGuire and the others, and they said, well, high, good people, respectable, honorable men. Right. Okay. So that was exposed, and that also basically saved the what was going on with the New Deal at the time, because Roosevelt had different problems. Maybe you heard, because right now Biden has been talking about it, or not really him, because he doesn't really talk, but other people around him have been talking about this idea of packing the court. So the Supreme Court, having more judges in the Supreme Court that obviously would be on Biden's side, so would just acquiesce to everything he demands. Well, at the time, FDR tried to do that, but for a very different reason, because basically the judge were vetoing the New Deal. They were vetoing what FDR was trying to do. And so he was trying to build the programs to get America going, get people employed, and a lot of these plans would, you would have to go around and change them, because the Supreme Court would basically clash with him and declare it unconstitutional. So he said, well, okay, what if we had more people who were pro New Deal in the Supreme Court? Well, not exactly what he said, but that's basically what he needed. He needed people to say, well, United States Constitution, this idea of the general welfare, it means that we can do what's necessary in order to put people back to work and recreate the real wealth of the nation. Because it's very different from just having money. This is not what FDR was trying to do, not just to have more money or exchange more money. That was not the goal. So I'm getting ahead of myself right now. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so, I can't see the title again. What did I say? What was my smart title there?
FDR's Guiding Philosophy.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Excellent. Could you read that, Matthew, please?
Yes. Okay. It has been brought home to us that the only effective guide for safety in this most worldly of worlds, the greatest guide of all, is moral principle. We do not see faith, hope, and charity as unattainable ideals, but we use them as stout supporters of a nation fighting the fight for freedom in modern civilization. Faith in the soundness of democracy in the midst of dictatorships. Hope renewed because we know so well the progress we have made. Charity in the true spirit of that grand old word. For charity literally translated means love. Love that understands, that does not merely share the wealth of the giver, but in true sympathy and wisdom helps men to help themselves. We seek not merely to make government a mechanical implement, but to give it a vibrant personal character that is very much the embodiment of human charity. In the place of privilege, we seek to build a temple out of faith, hope, and charity. Governments can err, presidents can make mistakes, but the immortal Dante tells us that divine justice weighs the sins of the cold-blooded and the sins of the warm-hearted on different scales.
Yeah, so that's, I hope you get to know FDR a bit better now. That's really important. FDR was always harking back at the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, but also to the Bible, to the Judeo-Christian heritage that he had, and that's something that was really important for him, I believe, because also if you look at the fireside chats, we're gonna be talking a little bit about them, but I mean, you have to listen to him. It's just really a great pleasure. I know for me to just listen and see what he was trying to do, to organize people, to get them on his side, to make them, to let them understand what he was trying to really do, because sometimes it's true. It's, you know, people who had not gone to, you know, Harvard Law School might not have understood everything that he was trying to do, but he was really making it clear, and he was telling them exactly what he was about to do and why he did it. On the banking holiday, the first fireside chat, that's these principles that he announced there in his speech at the Democratic Party convention. That's when he was nominated the second time in 36 to run again. So he accepted and he gave that speech, and I think that's very powerful, because he really gets, you know, 1 Corinthians 13. That's what it is. That's my policy. That's also on this Bible verse that he pledged allegiance. I mean, for his office the first time when he became president in 1932. Well, inaugurated in 1933. So I think that's something to look into. Not just to read nice words, but to really understand what he had in mind. So we've talked about economics a bit already. I just wanted to get into, you know, a bit of also what is being said these days or since then, because a lot of has been said on FDR and was what he was trying to do. And I think there's a lot of misconception that people have unfortunately taken as knowledge, but which has been peddled by the enemies of FDR, actually. So was FDR a Keynesian? Well, who's Keynes? You have Lord John Maynard Keynes, who lived almost identically, 1883, so 1 year after Roosevelt, and 1946, 1 year after Roosevelt, born and died. Yeah. So he wrote a big book, which was called The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. It was published in 1936, and basically the idea was that you needed to save the banks, get the liquidity going, save the banks because that's the most important. But, you know, not that the banks invest into any great project, but just, you know, just to get the money going. So if people want to go and buy stuff at the shopping center, well, they can. That's all that's needed. So no great project in mind, just save the banks and by the same nature the markets, and everything will be fine. So that was the idea of intervention, of government intervention, but that was the British idea, to just save the markets. It's a very financial, monetarist idea of what, you know, what is the economy, and therefore what is the life of people. It should be geared towards money interests. And Wikipedia tells us that, you know, by the late 1930s, everybody in the West had taken Keynes' policy for granted and was doing it, and blah blah blah. Okay, but that's it. There's a lot of things which are untold or brushed aside when discussing Keynes' theory and where it comes from. But I'm not going to go into this too much because Matthew has written a series of articles on Keynes and his counterpart from the Austrian School of Economics.
Frederick von Hayek.
Yeah, von Hayek, exactly. So I'm not going to go too much into this because you can just go and read Matthew's article, which is very good. It explains a lot. And, you know, it would one day maybe it would be a good presentation to go into more details, but, you know, not today. So that's what people thought and are portraying FDR to be today. Today, if you talk about FDR to young students at any school, economics programs, they will say, "Oh yeah, Keynesian economics, yeah." But no, that's not what FDR was doing. Actually, FDR was asked about the general theory, Keynes's general theory of employment, and he said, "Yeah, it makes a good doorstop." Because it's a huge book. It's not really coherent with what Roosevelt was doing, not at all. So he kind of made fun of this, and for good reasons. Keynes was also, head of the Eugenics Society in England. So, anyway, I'm not getting into this. Go read Matthew's article. You'll learn more. And yeah, Keynes' policies were actually adopted in Germany. And people like we saw previously with the attempted coup in 1935. Well, Time magazine was very happy of what was going on in Europe until around 1938. They were putting Hitler undercover, Mussolini undercover. Everything was fine, everything was going well. And that's New York Times Magazine, 1937, okay. Where Hitler dreams and plans. Oh, wow, nice. And the mountains. You see the nice picture? Wow, it's great. Yeah, well, they would not be so happy 2 years from then.
Pascal, do you have a high res version of that New York Times magazine? I want it.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Great.
I'm not sure, but yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll send it to you. So, and it wasn't just the Time and the New York Times magazine, but that these are the ones that I thought fit for now. And so that's the contrast. That's really the contrast, and that's what the oligarchy wanted for the United States. They really wanted the example of the fascist dictatorships, which were created in Europe, to take over and come to America. But no, there was a problem. FDR was there. And so we discussed the fireside chats, but I wanted to get back to this question of the leadership, because, really what FDR was doing was organizing the population. And there's this great quote from Lyndon LaRouche, which I was rereading recently, and I thought that was fitting for this presentation. So he said, "True leadership does not follow apparent public opinion blindly. True leadership shapes public opinion by educating the electorate in what it urgently needs to know." And that's exactly what Roosevelt was doing. He was cutting through because, as I mentioned before, a lot of the financial interests controlled the media, the newspapers at the time. And so by having this fireside chat, FDR could have a real relationship with the American citizen and could actually really explain, not just say, "Hey, we're gonna give you a job because it's good, that's what you need, that's what you want, that's what you asked for." Well, there's a process. There's something that you need to understand. Well, we need to work together, but you need to understand what's my plan. And that's what FDR was doing with the fireside chats. And also that's what he was doing with his wife. He said many times, because FDR was crippled, so he couldn't walk that much, but he was sending his wife on different tours around the United States. So Eleanor would go around and visit miners, farmers, every walk of life people, and she would gather all of this information and get it back to him, so he would have a true picture of what was going on. And that was, he said, Eleanor was his eyes and ears around the United States, around the country at the time. So that's very important. That's how he could really connect with the people and get things going. And he also was surrounded by a crew that he had put together, which it's not the same. That was the next slide. Sorry. Well, I told you we would go into a little bit of what was done, but if you look at the first 100 days of FDR's presidency, the first one in 1933, a lot of bills were enacted. A lot of bills were voted upon and enacted. And that was very important because the country was in crisis, and the fascist tendencies were very present, as you know now. So we don't really have time. I mean, I've already took a lot of time on many things, but one legislation which I thought was very important because it was signed on my date of birth, which is June 16th, is the Glass-Steagall Banking Act. No, it's not why it's so important, but it was an important legislation because basically FDR was not there to just destroy Wall Street or the financial interests, but he wanted them to actually work, even if it was against their own will and principles, to work not necessarily with FDR, yeah, but for the American people. And so the Glass-Steagall Banking Act was a law that splitted the banking system into different branches to make sure that basically speculation was not banking, banks were not speculating with people's savings. That you had savings banks, you had more financial institutions, speculative institutions, you had trusts, and you had insurance companies, but all separated. So they could not sell you insurance in a savings bank. They had to be separated. They couldn't use your money to go and speculate. So everything was ordered. And maybe my I'm talking my objection. Who am I to say? Well, I think FDR should have been even stricter on Wall Street and should have really abolished the Federal Reserve, but didn't happen. So that's just, what if? We don't know, but we'll never know. But that's maybe my complaint, my personal complaint would be that he did not destroy the Federal Reserve System at the time. And I think he could have had enough strength coming from the people if he had organized them to do that. But it didn't go that far. So anyway, but yeah, Glass-Steagall Banking Act, very important. And also the CCC. CCC. The Civilian Conservation Corps was really a very efficient program, which put a lot of people back to work, especially the young people who had no idea what to do with their lives because they were young when the crash happened, and they didn't have anything to live for until FDR came into office. And so around 3 years wasted, not learning really anything but tricks to survive. And so the Civilian Conservation Corps was not just planting trees, although they did, but they were really creating a citizenry that was able to to take on the challenge of the future. And as we know, the Second World War was looming. So let's go on. There it is. Okay, that's the. I put them there. There's more. As I said, there was part of it. His cabinet. I mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt also. She was clearly a great collaborator of FDR, but these were pretty special people. Francis Perkins, Harry Hopkins, Harold, I don't know if we say Hikes. I think we say Hikes. Henry Wallace. These were, when you look at the dates, they were there, even though maybe some of them changed position throughout FDR's presidencies. They were there from the beginning to the end. And so they understood what FDR was trying to do, and they were his greatest allies. Sorry. I'm realizing I'm talking a lot. I'm not used to that anymore. For the past 2 months, I haven't spoken much. So I just wanted to point these guys out because, Frances Perkins was a woman. She's the only woman in there, but all of them were very influential at implementing the New Deal and getting people to understand also what FDR was trying to do. So they were really his agents in the U.S. governmental apparatus to counter, because there were still pro, British or pro oligarchs in the State Department, and FDR complained about that. You'll see very soon. So I'm departing right now the domestic domain to lead you and end this presentation, I think fairly soon. We're taking more time than I thought, but sorry. I think it's worthwhile. And so let's discuss British imperialism, because FDR was very clear that the post-war had to be defined in terms of the American democracy, or what he understood that as democracy, the Republican form of governments. There's this famous quote, which is on the Roosevelt, the FDR monument in Washington, D.C. He said in 1941, so right when the United States actually entered the war, "They who seek to establish systems of government based on the regimentation of all human beings by a handful of individual rulers call this a new order. It is not new, and it is not order." So that's pretty clear. And it's not, if you think about it, it's not just, of course, in the context, you can understand that America is going to wage war against fascist, dictatorships in Europe. So Germany, Italy, but really, it's also an attack on the British Empire. Because, hey, what's an empire? Well, it's a handful of individual rulers who regiment all of humankind. That's what an empire is. So that's what he was against. And so that's something to keep in mind. A great book I read a long time ago, and I was looking for quotes, is As He Saw It. That's a book that was written by Elliot Roosevelt, one of FDR's son, who was very close to him during the war, was attending almost all meetings. And so Elliot was there when FDR talked to Churchill and explained his point of view concerning the post-war period. Why? So, you know, we're not going to do the World War II history right now. This is not interesting. A lot of other people have done it, you know, but let's look at how FDR was thinking about it. Why was the United States supporting England at the time? Even though clearly he had in mind that after the war, empires of all kinds had to disappear, could no longer run the show. So they met in Newfoundland, Argentia, on a boat next to Newfoundland in August 1941, FDR and Churchill. And that's what FDR told his son. He said, "I think I speak as America's president when I say that America won't help England in this war simply so that she will be able to continue to ride roughshod over colonial peoples." And the next day he was meeting Churchill, and Roosevelt recounts this discussion, or what Roosevelt told Churchill in blunt in his face. So that's FDR saying, "I am firmly of the belief that if we are to arrive at a stable peace, it must involve the development of backward countries, backward peoples. How can this be done? It can't be done, obviously, by 18th century methods," by which he meant, the British Empire's system. And Churchill was really upset about that. Again, you can look at 1932, the documentary, in the last 15 minutes, I believe. Look at The Arts by Matthew and get a good idea of the exchange, which was much longer than this, between FDR and Churchill.
Yeah, I put the link to that documentary in the chat box area for those interested in watching something tonight.
Great. Yeah, that's good. So FDR knew that, there was a problem. The war had to be won. He had to make plans, and that's what he did by negotiating different treaties with Iran, with the Philippines, with I'm missing others, but there were a lot of treaties, or diplomatic discussions that were led, and he got actually Churchill to sign on them, even though Churchill didn't want to get the empire to basically give up their colonies at the time. He was against Hitler, but he was a real imperialist, and that's what FDR was attacking. So FDR knew that there was this problem. How would he get the world out of this 18th century system? And he knew also that there were problems inside the United States, inside the governmental apparatus. So he said to his son also, that's recounted by Eliot in his book, any number of times the men in the State Department have tried to conceal messages to me, delay them, hold them up somehow, just because some of those career diplomats aren't in accord with what they know, I think. They should be working for Winston. As a matter of fact, a lot of the time they are. Stop to think of them. Any numbers of them are convinced that the way for America to conduct its foreign policy is to find out what the British are doing and then copy that. It isn't a question of whether they're Democrats or Republicans. So that's also something, you know, that brings us back to what I was telling you at the beginning. It's not so much, you know, about the parties. It's really more about the principles. And FDR was an American patriot. So he didn't accept that the British Empire would be leading after the war. And he, not only that, but he understood, you know, there was a different, the American system was a completely different system from the beginning against the British system. That's why they had fought the empire. So he was trying to get, if you remember the 1928 article in the Foreign Affairs, he was trying to get back to an American ideal, which, you know, could go back to the Monroe Doctrine also with John Quincy Adams and his version. And I encourage you to listen to his speech that is now called The Four Freedoms. But he gave a speech where he discussed the ideas of how the American ideal could basically spread all around the world. And that's something which, you know, obviously he had discussed with Churchill and with Stalin. And I think he had a much better response from Stalin. I think from what I've read, it was very interesting what could have been done if Roosevelt had not died so soon. But anyway, so the four freedoms are the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear, which also gets you back to his inaugural address when he said that there's nothing to be feared but fear itself. And these four freedoms, he wanted them for everywhere in the world. So it was not just an idea that, you know, it would be good for in the United States, but it would be good for the whole world. It was something that should be promoted. And that, you know, obviously that I think still today, everybody would like to have these, but it's not the case. So that was part of FDR design for the post-war. And again, going back, it really blends well with what he had called the good neighbors policy. So that's part of a speech that he gave at the Pan American, there was a special meeting of the Pan American Association in 1933. And he gave this part of this as an excerpt from the speech. So he said that's a good neighbor policy. Common ideals and a community of interest, together with a spirit of cooperation, have led to the realization that the well-being of one nation depends in large measure upon the well-being of its neighbors. Friendship among nations, as among individuals, calls for the constructive efforts to muster the forces of humanity in order that an atmosphere of close understanding and cooperation must be cultivated. In this spirit, the people of every republic on our continent are coming to a deep understanding of the fact that the Monroe Doctrine, of which so much has been written and spoken for more than a century, was and is directed at the maintenance of independence by the peoples of the continent. It was aimed and is aimed against the acquisition in any manner of the control of additional territory in this hemisphere by any non-American power. Each one of us must grow by an advancement of civilization and social well-being, and not by the acquisition of territory at the expense of any neighbor. I think that's clear also how the policy that Roosevelt wanted to bring forward to the whole world was already encapsulated or in germs in what he said in 1933 to this Pan-American special meeting of different nations that met in Washington, D.C., actually. So as I said, I think that's one of the slides I deleted, but okay. An international New Deal. That's something I wanted to reinforce, that's for sure. So that was the plan for the post-war, for FDR. We really wanted to have a plan for development, and that's where they headbutted with the British. And again, Keynes, you see him. Well, not only was he there in the 30s, but in the 40s, he was also trying to get the British to win the financial system, to win the organization of the post-war financial system on a world basis. And so let's say, for a small period of time, the American model, represented by FDR and Harry Dexter White, who was negotiating on the American side, that system was retained for the IMF, World Bank system. But eventually, when FDR died, all of this was reversed. And so you really had to push when FDR died, and when basically the leadership of the United States was reversed under Truman. You had really this British faction who came in and ushered in the Cold War. But I'm not going to go through that right now, since I think it's good for people to go back and look at the presentation by Cynthia last week to get an understanding of what was going on. I would just be repeating what she said, so it's no use. But really, I just wanted to emphasize the figures of Bertrand Russell and H.G. Wells, who were really pushing the British imperial strategy to replace the FDR grand design, and what Henry Wallace also had discussed in a TV broadcast when he called for not the century of the United States or any country, but the coming of the century of the common man. And so that was the plan for the post-war era. And I think I'm going to end there. That's a good idea. And if people are not tired too much, maybe you can ask me questions.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful, Pascal. And just before, we have about 30 minutes of time for some questions, and I've got a few people already in queue. Lot of positive comments coming through. I am really, really overjoyed that you were able to go through it the way you did, and the fact that originally I know you were supposed to do both FDR and JFK. I fully understand why you requested to break it up into 2 chapters.
Yeah.
So that being said,
Jerry is happy too.
Jerry's happy too. Yes. No, and this was really the sort of comprehensive program that I really wanted as a reference point, because today we who actually aspire for a better future and love the causal nexus of history that brought us into the present circumstances and the tragedies and the beauty that could have happened and the tragedies that did happen. There's so much garbage and slander around FDR. So it's so important to have this type of resource material to really internalize our understanding of what FDR was. Because again, I've never seen somebody, or there's very few people who are so slandered and maligned as he is. So next week, we have a gap. We had an opening spot where we weren't going to do a presentation next week. So the fact that you did what you did, and you have chapter 2 on JFK, I think you can just have next week, Pascal, and continue the story into JFK's fight. So now we have 28 minutes. So the first name that I got on that list, who was in queue, was Irina. Go for it.
Right. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, this is not my main question, but I want to ask Matt, when you do the final editing on this session, to put that link to the documentary 1932
Okay. Yes.
in that, because I can't access it. I'm on an iPhone.
Will do.
Anyway, so my question, I wonder if anyone can briefly explain what happened in the 40 years between 1933 and 1973 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. What happened there? Was there some sort of quasi gold standard that we went back on and then it had to be taken off again? Because I don't understand that at all.
Right. Okay. That's a good question. Okay. Well, the gold standard was not exactly altogether abolished by FDR. It was a temporary measure, which he was afforded at the time because it was really a crisis. Like when presidents issue executive orders, that was kind of how he did it. Although I think it was maybe even voted upon, but it was temporary. It was not something that was meant to change the whole thing, which was my complaint, what I said about the Federal Reserve and how it should have completely be abolished or transformed into a national banking institution controlled by the government, not by just private appointees as we have today. So the fact that we still have this today, in part, I guess, answers your question. And the system after really what you have to look at is what the Bretton Woods, what the new institutions that were created at the end of the war. I mentioned the IMF and World Bank, and today, most people, or at least it used to be that most people on the left hated these institutions when I was younger, for good reasons. But really, this British takeover, the return of the British policies, that's what created this. That's what made so that the system didn't really change that much, only under FDR. And then a little bit, Kennedy tried stuff, and it was a good try, and we'll talk about it later, next week.
Cool. All right. Next question is from Bob.
Okay, my question concerns Henry Wallace and when he was replaced by Harry Truman on the ticket, which changed so much Roosevelt's idea of the UN and all the things that he sort of cherished the most. How did his popularity fall to such an extent that he knew he was ill and everything? How did it fall to that extent that he must have been forced to put Truman on the ticket, or how did that work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you remember, I don't know if the comparison is good, but I'll try anyhow. You remember how Trump was surrounded by crazy people?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the answer is, what FDR said about the State Department, these career diplomats, the people that were in, what you would call the deep state today.
Yeah.
Remember also what the Democratic Party was before Roosevelt. It was not such a great bunch of guys, running policies for the common man. So yeah, there was factional fights in the Democratic Party. And I think that, the leadership, knowing that FDR was very ill, decided to put Wallace on the side and get Truman in. I don't know exactly how all of this was done, the inner politics, but clearly Wallace was a bit more forceful in what he wanted to bring about. I think he was a bit brash, but he was clearly slandered a lot. And the British knew.
Slandered in the press. It was in the media mostly.
No, sorry, I missed that.
Was it in the media that he was slandered?
Yeah, at the time,
Yeah.
And then still to this day, a lot of what I was able to look at, I tried to do a little research on him to see what people say, and it's a lot of, and it's just like, it's not really a hypothesis. It's just like, we think this, we think that, we don't really know. It might have been this, or maybe FDR was crazy at the time, was getting insane in 1944, 45. So there's a lot of speculation, which goes into this nagging and slandering of these characters, and you don't really know what's true or not. But it's clearly, what I saw was always very pejorative and nasty against Wallace. So I think it was something coming from the inside.
But when I think of it, when you think of it, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Kennedy, all their ideals were sort of destroyed by their vice president. It would seem that if they were able to have chosen their vice president, that if he didn't have this running mate thing going, and they were able to choose it, just run as a single person and choose their vice president afterward, the country would be a lot better off. That's just a comment.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. It's also how Theodore Roosevelt became president, huh? Because McKinley's vice president died, so he became vice president, and then McKinley got shot, and so he became president. So no, it's not perfect. You're right.
That is an understatement.
I don't know what else to say. It's really.
Yeah. Well, I'm very much looking forward to next week's class, Pascal. I really, really am. Jerry actually just threw in his 2 cents on the gold standard. He just said in the chat box that the gold standard, FDR wanted fixed exchange rates for development financing. Jerry, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more. Or?
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I think Pascal did a good job in giving FDR's concept of the post-war period for developing the, whatever you want to call it, backward countries, third world countries. Today we would call them developing countries. South America, Africa, Asia. The problem is that private financing couldn't do it because of the instability of these countries' currencies. So the idea behind the Bretton Woods system is that you would peg the US dollar to gold, and that was fixed. The other countries simply would peg their currency to the US dollar. They didn't have to go to the gold standard, just peg it to the dollar. So that for developing countries, these are huge projects of infrastructure, long-term. If you're going to finance long-term projects, you need stable currencies, stable exchange rates of currencies. So that with this type of pegging the US dollar to gold and the other currencies pegged to the dollar, you could actually plan and finance these long-term projects. And once Nixon took the US dollar off of gold, then all of the other currencies in the world, therefore, were no longer stable. And you had floating exchange rates, and you could attack countries, attack their currency, and it just made it impossible to finance long-term development projects, which is something that the Belt and Road Initiative today is actually addressing. How do you finance long-term development projects? And they're taking their ideas from FDR. So that's all the gold standard was. It wasn't that important, but it's a way you could finance long-term development. The idea what was important. That's all I was getting at, Pascal.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you, Jerry, for bringing it back. Because it's true, I kind of went fast on this. But it's true, you know, if you have the gold mines on your territory, which actually is most of Africa, they should be, you know, they should be rich. But under the British Empire system, they were not rich, even though they had the gold. But, you know, the banks, the one who held the gold or were pillaging the gold, they could, make it, you know, rain or not, basically. Mm-hmm. So you're right. You're right. This is a very important thing to mention and to know. Mm-hmm. And it was, you know, I would just add this that, you know, it was the best compromise that could be created at the time, because if people want to go back to Hamilton's paper, the one he presented to Congress on the currency, he discusses that. He says, you know, gold and silver, well, for international trade, yeah, but, you know, paper credit for internal affairs, we don't need gold and silver. So really the Hamiltonian system in the most fundamental, it is not a gold or silver system. It doesn't worry about that. It's really a question of Article 1, Section 8. The Congress is going to fix the price of the currency, the exchanges, the taxes, this and that for the common good. And it doesn't matter if you have gold or silver. That's not what we put faith in. So Hamilton's paper, that's really, that would have been, you know, even the best, but at the time, I think it was the most he could have been done at the end of the Second World War.
Thank you, Pascal.
Yes, thank you, Pascal, for taking the time to educating and elucidating all of us and putting light on this period of history. So I look forward to everybody being here next week and conversing some more. Pascal has a lot more to go through. Carol wrote, okay, Carol, you can write me that privately. Come on, getting a few more messages. Yes, basically all very positive messages, Pascal. And save your chats because there are links inside the chats that people can go to for further research. So thank you, everyone.
Great.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
See you. Take care.
Yes. Thank you, Pascal.
Salut, Pascal. Salut, Matt. Salut, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you. Next time.
Pascal.
Thank you.